Okay, and we are now recording. Welcome, my name is Morgan Dunton. This is March 31st. We're almost at April Fools. Aren't we thrilled? It is pretty foolish. And this is our first session, really looking at the difference making that transition to virtual learning. This session is about text-dependent questions, and some of you may have been with me before when we've explored text-dependent questions. It's even more important that we get a solid handle on this in our new virtual world in the way that we're trying this. So I want to share a few things with you. Let me get some things up on my screen. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to share my screen. So this is my Padlet, and you'll see I have this thing here called virtual learning, professional learning virtual style. So this is where I posted everything that I'm going to be using today. And so it's padlet.com. You see my name, Morgan_Dunton /2020 ELA virtual. It's ELA large, virtual, small. So I've just posted things in here, resources that I'll be using during this session. Now, I will put this also in the chat. All right, let me put this link up in the chat. And you'll know that you can grab everything there as well. Okay, so I do have slideshow prepared. And there we go. Sorry, sometimes I have to talk through this a little bit to get me where I want to go. All right, I'm going to share the slideshow. There. All right, and I get to see you again. Deep breath, deep breath. We survived the Zoom bombing, and we can move forward. All right, we're going to talk about text-dependent questions and prompts, leading to the kinds of text-dependent prompts that we're working on. First of all, just a quick review. Hopefully in the next half hour or so, we'll be able to define those qualities of text-dependent questions, what we really mean by text-dependent questions. The biggest learning today, even if you're not solid on TDQ, is just understanding why it's such a critical approach now in this changing environment. And I don't think there'll be time to address it, but we should at least discuss assessment and scoring practices as a result of TDQ. I think that's the biggest question going forward. All right, so here's a question. This is actually a prompt some of you may have seen. If you could create a soundtrack for your life, what songs would you include and why? Discuss at least 2 songs and explain why you picked them. All right, so I want you to take a moment and think about what would your own response be. Can you pull 2 songs out of your head right now that you could justify as a soundtrack for your life? In the participants box, whoops, that is not what I wanted to do. I believe you can give a yes or no response. If you look in the participants box, there's like little voting tabs at the bottom. No? Okie dokie. Then never mind that one. All right, so think about this. This is a prompt that was posted for students to be able to work on at home. But here's my question. What is the essential vocabulary in this prompt that students would be able would need to know in order to respond? So think about it. What are the academic words? What are the topical words? Go ahead and write this in the chat box. Yeah, I see some of you are really picking up on the academic words like discuss and explain. We're assuming that students know exactly how to discuss in an essay and what explain means. Soundtrack is a big one. We have to, we have to assume that we've already had some past learning or some explanation of soundtrack. Okay, how about this? I think there are some implied assumptions about the student's prior learning. What are we assuming about what students already know? Yeah, and you know what? Soundtrack and playlist are two different things, and kids may know playlist better than soundtrack. Who knows? So what are some assumptions? Think about some embedded assumptions. What do you think we are assuming about the student's experience of prior learning? Yeah, that's one thing, is that students have access with different types of music, that they have a list of songs. We're probably assuming that I agree that music is important to them, so that choosing a soundtrack is something that motivates them. It's school appropriate. Truly, when you're opening up like that, it may not be school appropriate. You're completely right, Linda. You're opening the door there. So let's think about the success criteria for this prompt. How will students know when they've met the learning expectation? What is the success criteria for this prompt? In other words, what are the kinds of things that you would, what are the kinds of things that you might score them on? So I think there's also some assumptions in there about success criteria. You're saying, like, are they picking up on certain lyrics? Are they looking at certain qualities as they explain why they picked them? And so again, that relies on a lot of prior learning, and I think that it needs to be, the scoring piece of it needs to be much more explicit than what is here. Um, so there's a lot of layers for scoring that are not evident in this particular prompt. And what feedback can you give the students? They've chosen 2 songs. What if they're not 2 songs you would have chosen for them, Yeah, this is a question. This is a good question, Linda. Are you looking for an essay? Are you looking for just a paragraph? How much writing? And I agree. I think that a lot of students will say, I like this song. I listen to it a lot. A rubric would help, but I'm still not entirely certain that this particular prompt lends itself to the kind of writing that we want students to be practicing. So that's what's tough. I think that we have a lot of resources coming at us fast and furious. We're being asked to do lots of different things. Some people are being told to stand down and do nothing. Some people are being told to be online during their regular class time, take attendance, and collect assignments. I think probably the right choice is somewhere in between, something that is somewhat different from that. And we probably have a lot to learn. So here's something we're going to talk about today. What we really want is for students to give evidence-based responses. And I think when I asked you about the success criteria, a lot of you were pointing to that, but you were pointing to evidence that you were naming that wasn't necessarily explicit in the question. And that's what we want to get at. We want to make sure that we're leading up to being very clear about what we expect from evidence-based responses. So let's start by defining text-dependent questions. The purpose of text-dependent questions is to support close reading, right? Getting the students to go back and to reread, getting beyond the facts. Text-dependent questions are not just recall questions. They're ways to get the student to engage with the text at deeper levels. So this should be pretty easy. Just put a 1 or a 2 in the chat box. Which of the following questions require students to read the text closely? 1 or 2. Exactly. So, Constitution. If you were present at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, what would you do? Students don't have to read a thing. What are the reasons listed in the preamble? Well, here students can go directly to elements of the preamble. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for something that the students can reference specifically. So I want the word that I highlighted right here is explicitly, but the word that I want you to really pay attention to is refer, that the students refer explicitly back to the text that they're reading. That doesn't mean that they have to copy explicitly the text. It means they refer back to it. You know, they can talk about in the 3rd chapter when this thing happens, you know, this is what this means. That's a direct reference to an explicit, you know, that's an explicit and direct reference to the text. That's okay. An explicit reference doesn't have to be a direct copy. And that's a problem that we got into with the writing assessment that we've been doing and a change we hope to make. So a text-dependent question really does explore the text and not the student's experience. So you want to be careful to look at the way that we're phrasing those questions to see is it referring to the text or the student's own thoughts about it. So what we want to do is make sure that we're aligning to standards. And most of the standards ask the students to do some critical reading, some deeper reading, and deeper thinking. So this is how we get to those standards-based responses. I want to point out this second bullet in particular. I know a lot of us came up through our teacher training with this idea that we wanted to make text relevant to students by connecting it to the wider world, connecting it to their own experience. And we tend to do that first. I think that, you know, through the evolution of teaching reading, we were taught that was the very first thing you do. Look at the text and have the students connect it to the wider world. But we're finding that that immediately asks the students to step out and go away from the text before they have a deep and intimate understanding of what is in the text. And it's harder for them to make a connection to the wider world if they're not understanding all that the text itself involves. And I think this 3rd bullet is huge. It does not rely on the student's prior knowledge. And that's, I think, what is making parents crazy right now with some of the assignments we're sending home, because they're having to help students build some prior knowledge and build some skill in order to get to that response. And that's, that brings up a question of fairness. So if we keep the questions focused on the text itself, then it should be about the text and not the student's wider world experience. So here are the things that we ask students to do. Analyze closely a segment of the text and look at how the words and the phrases and the sentences build to the paragraphs and how the whole text connects. We ask students to investigate. Okay, so what if we change something a little bit? If this, then that. Why does the author choose a particular word? Look at shades of meaning and how different words can change your experience of that text. So probe the arguments, you know, probe the key details, take a deeper look. We look at how shifts are made. How does an author take you through a certain thought process? How does the author intentionally affect the reader? Question why authors choose to begin and end when they do. Why does the story start here? This is especially helpful, I think, when stories are told in a non-chronological order. Students can really get hung up on how the story unfolds. So paying attention to beginnings and endings and why. We also want students to be able to note and assess patterns of writing. Now, one thing that's really interesting is when students begin to recognize an author's style, and they can look at a text and know, oh, Lord, yes, that's William Faulkner. I know because every sentence has at least 100 words. And a big part of text-dependent questions is considering what the text doesn't say. What does it leave unstated? What does it leave uncertain? All right, we're used to these. When we watch TV, we get to the cliffhanger. It's like, oh, yes, I know there's going to be another episode, another season. We know there's going to be a sequel when it ends with a cliffhanger. It leaves something uncertain, unstated, unfinished. And that's important to recognize. In informational text, sometimes things are left unstated and uncertain on purpose because things are not known. We've certainly seen a lot of that recently. So the first step we have to take in developing text-dependent questions is really making sure that we're choosing a worthy text. Supramental likes to call these, you know, juicy text, something that has a lot to offer that's worthy of doing this great close reading. Yeah, thank you, Jared, about the prior knowledge. We really do need to work on that. So characteristics of a worthy text. First of all, you know, you want to think about the genre or the form, right? And there may be specific characteristics that you want to teach. But think about the different forms. So the genre may be mystery. The form could be novel, film, graphic novel. I mean, I think there's a lot of graphic novels now that are reflective of different genres, actually. So graphic novel is not necessarily its own particular genre, it's the form. We want to think about the structure. Is there a particular structure of the text that makes it worth looking at, that makes it worth examining and looking at more closely? And think about this too, especially with informational text, there can be a variety of structures, there can be lots of things added in, and students may need a little bit extra support to build that understanding of how these graphic elements over here, these narrative or informational elements over here. And so that's important to make sure that you're helping them with that. The content, whether it's the topic, you know, so right now, I think a lot of people, I've seen some reading lists right now that are looking at issues of loneliness or friendship or isolation, survival, certainly. I think a lot of us are trying to avoid the apocalyptic kind of units right now. But the characteristic of a worthy text, it could be strictly because of the content. And beware that some topics may require specific vocabulary. That may make it worthwhile to teach at the moment. So, of course, themes. Who among us has not taught a coming-of-age story? Certainly for students right now, coming of age is taking a different form for them, going through some of these rites of passages. So these may be some of the themes that we want to choose at the moment. And certainly, especially with the upper grades, we really want to think about language use and literary features. A lot of times when we get up into the upper grades or getting at more complex texts, these can be mixed, these can be blended. So you could have a text that is that encompasses narrative and expository elements and also has a fair amount of figurative language in order to make the expository point, or actually tipping into persuasion. And a big thing we want to look for, an important factor of a worthy text, is sentence complexity. We're asking students to write more and more complex texts themselves. We're asking them to get more sophisticated in their writing. So we should make sure that we're choosing texts that have a variety of syntax, a sophistication of writing and sentence structures. All right, I don't suggest Absalom for everyone. And by the way, the sentence I put on here is not even the entire sentence. It couldn't fit on a slide. But just to make my point, it is worth teaching some variety of sentence structures, even if you're picking out a few long, juicy sentences to break them down. So these are things that make a text a worthy text. I have no doubt you've already done that. You've chosen worthy text for a variety of reasons. It's important to note the reason that you chose the text. The thing that you thought was worth the time and effort for the students to do the close reading. Because sometimes we get going on our lesson plans and we forget, and we lose track of the thing that makes that text the worthy text for the unit we're in. So make sure that you are capturing those things that you noticed in that text. You know, we do these complexity analyses, and then we give a complex text a really superficial kind of treatment without honoring the complexity of the text. So consider, before you even begin, the culminating task. What is the thing that you want the students to do as a result of reading or viewing? What's the thing you want them to do as a result of this text experience? So I'm going to draw from this particular text. I love Doug Fisher and Nancy Frey for how they write and write for teachers. And so I'm drawing from this text about text-dependent questions for grades 6 through 12. They promote a 4-phase approach to text-dependent questions. The phases just represent that it's, questions are progressive, they're iterative. The way that they have set up this questioning phases, they do align to reading standards. So you can see it's chunked out for you the way that the standards line up to the different phases. And you keep starting anew with each new reading assignment. So it's not like you're going to do phase 1 for chapter 1 and phase 2 for chapter 2. You can use all 4 of the phases with each piece that you teach. So the first phase is, what does the text say? Literally, of course. You want to make sure that the students understand what is going on. You want to look at the key details, making sure that the students are clearly understanding key details in the text. And you begin to form that bond between the big ideas and the supporting evidence. So the first phase is, what does the text say? Phase 2 is, how does the text work? This is an important phase of the reading process for developing transfer of literacy skills. So you start asking the students to really look at the mechanics of the text. This is, start with the punctuation, start looking at how the text is organized. Look at the vocabulary, pick out the vocabulary within it. Then we get to the author's craft. Why does the author choose to write the text in this way, to tell the story, to share the ideas in this particular way? And this is where you pay attention to certain text features. Sometimes this is the best place to begin, the very first thing to do. And especially if you have a complex text with multiple features, you might want to start with this phase of reading. How does the text work? The third phase is how, what does the text mean? So this is where we really start getting into some of the analysis. We're looking at the author's purpose and how the author achieves that purpose. We're looking at whether or not the students can connect ideas across different parts of the text and to other texts that you've been using. And of course, you know, with argument, I think we're all familiar with ethos, pathos, and logos. This is where you get at how the text, what does the text mean? And finally, the fourth phase is, what does the text inspire you to do? So maybe the text inspires the students to look more deeply into the topic that is presented in the text. For me, a lot of times, I'll find related, I'll start reading series. I'll read the first in a series, and I'll want to stick with that until I finish the whole series. That would be a related reading. What's the culminating activity? You know, have you set the students up to be ready to jump into their culminating activity? So this is how the progression of text-dependent questions develops, okay? From the part to the whole, from the word to the entire text. And this is how it aligns to the standards. I'm going to say this is the Common Core reading standards. So you'll see standards 4, 5, and 6 have to do with author's craft. And when you get up to 7, 8, and 9 about building meaning, you really are getting up to higher order thinking. Now, this also reflects climbing the Bloom scale, or whatever method of cognitive demand that you use. So here's a quick checklist for developing text-dependent questions. We want the questions to help the student return to the text. You know, repeated reading is really helpful for developing literacy skills. And do the questions require the student to use evidence from the text? Do they have to go back and look at the text? Are you moving from explicit to implicit knowledge? Are we making sure that all students are moving to some of that interpretation and analysis? So when I show you an example, this is from Doug Fisher and Nancy Frey's presentation. So this is an example of how they took the Chief Joseph speech and demonstrated these 4 phases of questioning. So I think you all know the speech. I'm going to assume it ends with this particular quote. So we start with a general understanding. What does the text say? So we're still looking at a general understanding, but we're asking again about a specific element of the text. Chief Joseph names a couple of people. You don't have to know who they are to know that they influenced his decision. Still looking at what the text says, this time for key details. And the elevation of the question here is, how do you know? He says what he's concerned about, but it's more implicit than explicit in some parts. You have to know a little bit about what's going on. So here's an opportunity to engage with students, to interact, you know, to have them read aloud and demonstrate the inflections and intonations. This can show you that they do understand what the text says. If you have a chance to record in the programs that you're using, you can do that. Now we're going to look at how the text works. So this is a vocabulary question looking at the use of language. We don't usually think of the sun standing. Another vocabulary question. How do the words he chose indicate the tone? And again, students have to go back and pull out something specific from the text. Structure is key. Structure questions are really hard, but they're key, especially when we start building toward demonstrating transfer of learning. How does the structure convey Chief Joseph's mood? So the way that he says, you know, you can feel the energy declining in his speech. Will students be able to discuss that? This is another structure question. There's no question that that last word, forever. I will fight no more, forever. That's the thing that makes it key. All right. So it ends with the word that elevates the meaning of the text. Now we get to what does the text mean? Making inferences. Okay, so remember here we're taking them to a part of the sentence. I want to have time to look for my children. And now you have to take the students to other parts of the speech to support the claim. Do they understand what that sentence means? How do they know it? Whoop. So this is an interesting intertextual connection to bring in. His father died. His father made a speech, and he responded to it. So we're asking students, now that you've seen this little speech from his father, how does that help you understand his position and the difficult choice that he made? So here is a possible essay prompt. Writing from sources is another one, a Fisher and Phrase professional text that I really enjoy. But this particular prompt came from the Literacy Design Collaborative. They have a task template. So there's a nice place to go to get some of their prompt templates. So now let's look again. If you could create a soundtrack for your life, what songs would you include and why? Discuss at least 2 songs and explain why you picked them. Let's just not do that one. That really is not a text-based prompt unless you've done a whole lot of other stuff and you've got some place for them to start from. So here's something for us to think about in the digital environment. Okay, here's something, a way for us to think about text-based questions in a digital environment. This is from Edutopia. So I want to prioritize longer assignments. Think about things that take a little bit of time instead of a lot of, you know, in our classroom, we're looking at lots of things that give us a quick turnaround. We can't do that. This is a big one. You'll not be able to correct mistakes on the fly. You cannot adjust your teaching. Once it's out there, it's out there. So you want to slow down and take some time to do some planning. So you've got a long-term goal. I think for most of us, it's tough to think about moving from planning lessons with the entire class all at once to moving into an asynchronous learning environment, but that's definitely something we need to do. So I thought we might try this out with a short text. Oh, and here goes the question of, will technology work for me? I think, wait a minute, I'm going to pause for just a moment to check the chat box and just give you a few minutes to reflect on this before we jump in and try it out. You know, I'm going to go back up here in the chat box just a little bit. You're right. Teachers are doing a lot of talking. So an interesting challenge that Doug and Nancy do in their school, you know, they run a high school out in California, is they do these little micro teaching pieces. So you have someone videotape you teaching a specific lesson. It's just, you know, a short lesson, not entire like 80-minute class period, but a 15-minute lesson on this thing. And then you watch yourself, and you know, you watch with a partner, you look at, you time, how many students spoke, how long did you speak, what kinds of questions did you ask? And it's really eye-opening, I think, for a lot of teachers to get a handle on that. How about this? Someone said, could I go back for one moment? So you're right. This is a time when teachers are doing less talking. We're really trying to get the kids to do more of the talking. All right, so I'm going to try to see if we can do this with a little task. I have a 2.5-minute film trailer, okay, just a film trailer. And I'm going to ask you to think about what information is shared in this film trailer. Can you write a one-sentence summary? Can you determine the purpose of the film from this film trailer? Think about the language that's used in the trailer that helped you understand the purpose of the film. And what questions do you expect to be explored or answered during this film? So the film is called One Child Nation. I saw it last September at the Camden International Films Festival, and the filmmaker herself was there in attendance. It was really interesting. It aired last night on MPBN. I think it's going to air again. It's on Amazon Prime right now. It is an Amazon documentary. In fact, Amazon, you know, creates documentaries each year, and this one was released last year. Really interesting film. But I feel like right now, especially where people are talking so much about China and coming to know China, this is a film that explores a little bit of history in China. It's not necessarily, I'm saying that you want to share this with students, but for us today in our learning environment, let's think about this. So, what's this film about? How do you know? And what do you expect to be explored? All right, if all goes well, $64,000 question when it starts is, can you hear it? Hold on, I have to go. Give me a thumbs up when it starts if you can hear it.
I was born in China in 1985, a time when China's population crisis was making headlines around the world.
So I'm going to guess no, because I didn't see any thumbs up. No sound? Very garbled. You know what? It's okay because it's all in subtitles.
I was born in China in 1985, a time when China's population crisis was making headlines around the world. I never thought much about what the policy should be anymore until I learned that I was going to be about me. None of my family questioned the policy or how it was implemented. I was so angry, even with my own family. There wasn't more to be said, but we spoke to at the same time. 没办法，是不是？
Whoop. I'm going to take this back a couple of slides. All right, so I do apologize, it was garbled. I haven't quite figured out when you embed video how to improve the sound quality. I think that, you know, it's just taking a whole lot of bandwidth. But I still think you get the gist of this. So what's the purpose of the film? Anyone want to take a stab at it? What do you think is the purpose of the film? How about at this point you can unmute and we'll have a discussion. I think one of the topics, and it may have been hard to zero in because of because it was garbled, but the filmmaker asked her mother, "Do you think it was right?" And the mother said, "Yes, people were starving. They did it because of a food shortage. We cannot feed our country, therefore we need fewer people to feed." I don't know if you noticed, like the little boy at the beginning who was singing the song, and the kids that were singing, and the ladies who were dancing. It was the propaganda. If you ever wanted to study propaganda and how propaganda influences an entire mindset, this is a film to do that. What questions do you expect to be explored or answered during the film? Definitely for high school, upper high school, I'd say too. So just from the tone of the trailer, what do you expect? Yeah, that contrast of how people reacted then and how they respond now. So I think there's a lot to be said with ethics, and you saw her ask somebody about, was his family the biggest trafficker in the country? And there's guilt and rationalization. And I can tell you, if you compare that with German culture and a collective guilt of people who weren't even born at the time of you know, Hitler and the Nazis, there's still a collective national guilt. So I think these things are suggested in the little pieces that come out from the film itself. So I just wanted to give us a chance to practice a little bit how we look at developing text-dependent questions. So here's what I'm suggesting. As you look at the assignments that you're sending home with students, now think about this. We're being asked to design digital assignments. A lot of us are working in Google Classrooms or something similar, but many people are also being asked to send home packets, printed assignments. We're calling them the no-techs, your no-tech assignments. So, you can't rely on students having access to lots of ways to answer many questions. So the first thing maybe we want to check is whether the students can respond with evidence from the text at hand, from the texts that are in their hands, or do they need to go look elsewhere? You're going to know best whether your students have access to any other resource. Make sure you know what the culminating activity is, and that the questions and tasks you're asking them to do, and I'm thinking that we're asking students to write paragraphs right now, more than a whole lot of essays. Do these activities lead to the culminating activity? Do they reflect that progression of close reading tasks? Are you asking students to think about how the text works as well as what it means? And this is a big one, is just to be patient, give students time to work. None of us are on our regular timeline right now. So if you can develop a series of questions and tasks that stick close to the text that they have, and be patient, just be patient. Yeah, this film had some, definitely had some violence. There's a disturbing scene where they're at a dump and they're opening up trash bags and finding infants. Yeah. So again, I'm not suggesting this is a great film, but it was on PBN last night. It's out there right now on Amazon. It's current. And China, I think we're trying to learn more about China. Oh, What Happened to Monday is also violent. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one. Okay. Oops. Sorry, went too far. So here's what I'd like to ask you to do. There's this link at the bottom of the page. Let me put it into, well, shoot. I'll put it into the text box in just a moment. To get your contact hours, you need to complete the survey, and then you have to answer yes to the last question. Let me tell you, if you don't answer yes to the last question, it doesn't take you to your contact hours, okay? All right, so now let me get that. Here we go. Let me get that link into the text box. Okay, I'm going to invite you to unmute and discuss anything you'd like to discuss. If you're done, I'm just going to remind you to go down to the bottom right-hand corner of the chat box. You see the box with 3 little dots in it. Click on that, and you can save the whole chat. Great. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I got to tell you, that 4 phases, ever since I studied that book, that's been my go-to. I look at my questions to make sure that I'm coming out in all 4 of those phases. And the thing that we tend to ignore the most is phase 2, how does the text work? But that's the one that Doug and Nancy are finding in their research leads to the best chance of transfer. It's how students get to transfer those literacy skills they're learning and practicing to whatever they go to. Great. Well, if you get a chance to go look at the Padlet, I put some other links in there as well for some of the resources. You know, like there's a document for thinking through the questions that you're asking. And you know, you don't have to do it very long before you just get into a natural habit of asking text-dependent questions. All right, I'm just going to hang out. If anybody has any questions or wants to chat, I'll just hang around for a bit. At this point, I'm going to stop the recording. All right, we'll see you on Thursday. Yes, Thursday we're going to have office hours.
Thank you, Morgan.
Take care. Hope you're all doing well.
You as well.
Get out and enjoy the sunshine. It has finally come out.